All right. Hi, everybody. This is John Mancini. I'd like to welcome you to this special edition of the OxyMorons. And I'm really pleased today to focus this a little bit on the upcoming MER Conference and two of the really key speakers from that conference. And so we have Rob Bogan and Raphael Moscatel here. And so say hello, everybody.
Hello,
everybody. And what we're going to do today, I thought, is spend a little bit of time talking about an issue that I think really confounds organizations. And it's one that's squarely in the sweet spot for OxyMorons, who, for those of you that aren't familiar with the show, these are the practical dreamers or the visionary pragmatists in organizations that struggle with this particular issue, which is what I want to talk about is what keeps otherwise effective organizations from deploying innovative governance technologies. So I know in some of the areas that I work in, there's an awful lot of really interesting technological developments that make this task of governance different than the one that, we had, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And yet organizations have this resistance in there sometimes to embracing technology. And it's not an unusual thing. We see it all the time in organizations. This change management question is one of the most vexing things they deal with on a day-to-day basis. So let me start with a little bit of introductions. And Raphael, why don't you go first? Just give a minute on who you are and what you do, and talk a little bit about the book. And I'll put a little banner up on the screen so people can see the information on the name of the book, and also go with that. And then maybe wrap up a little bit with the song on your playlist that would surprise everybody. So go.
Well, thank you, John, for having me here on OxyMorons. My name is Raphael Moscatel. I am the Managing Director of Compliance and Privacy Partners. We're a consultancy based in Los Angeles. We do work mostly around privacy compliance, the GDPR, CCPA, and we're working a lot now in Canada because of the new privacy law that they have on deck there. So we work to kind of align processes with governance software that they're bringing in. And, there's a kind of a whole new suite of privacy tools that are being brought in. In the interim, during COVID, my partner and I, Abby, who unfortunately couldn't be with us, we wrote a book called Tomorrow's Jobs Today, based on emerging technologies, including privacy. But also about AI and blockchain, big data. As we mentioned, many of those interviews were sourced from the MER Conference. And so we just published that book with John Hunt, and it's available now. And so we're really excited to put that out there and kind of celebrate some of these change management leaders and disruptors. So that's where we are career-wise. And as far as the book, we had just talked kind of on the pre-show on my podcast, or on my radio right now is Chris Stapleton, Starting Over. And I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Stapleton, but he's out of Nashville. And I'm not a country person, so I think it would surprise a lot of people because I'm originally from Los Angeles, but we're heading to Montana. And I was up there a few weeks ago, put this on the radio, couldn't stop listening to it. It's a beautiful song. And since my wife and I were kind of starting over and moving the kids and the family up to Montana, we thought that'd be the right thing to put on our playlist.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, no, and I'm glad to hear about the book. And we were also talking in the little pregame session. I've long had an affection for the MER event and for the quality of the speakers and the audience. And that's coming up for people that aren't familiar with it. It's coming up on May 24th through 27th, and you can still register, and a lot of great speakers. And so I would urge you to check it out. Okay, Rob, your turn.
Yeah, I don't know what I do. No. Rob Bogan, I've spent most of my career in one way or another hanging around with SharePoint and Office and Microsoft, but I've also done all sorts of things, built courses. We just last year released the Confident Change Management course, as well as a whole website. And it was really cool to get the invitation to come chat with you again, because I think this is a place that is near and dear to my heart. I mean, all of us, I think, have been doing technology for a really long time. And I think we realize that it's not the technology that's the hard part. So the Confident Change Management course is designed to teach people the change management aspects. If somebody's a technologist who's never had to worry about that, then we help solve that. And there is a 6 Keys to Confident Change Management book that's available on Amazon. It's actually an Amazon #1 bestseller. And we have a session. I've got a session at the MER talking about healthy records management of COVID-19 health screenings. It's a really interesting topic, and it's actually a great way to be able to communicate to the business the value of information governance. So looking forward to that.
Terrific. So let's start out, and pretty basic question, and you can kind of chime in. Maybe we'll start with you, Raphael, for the first one. Is this whole question of governance change, and why do organizations resist it? What are sort of the obstacles that they put in their own way in terms of embracing this kind of change?
So it's a good question, John. I kind of think to my experience right now, what I'm doing personally, and kind of making a huge change as we move to a new state with the family. And I really think that what drives a lot of this, and I'm also speaking as a practitioner who worked for one of the largest insurance carriers in the country and one of the largest media companies, it's really a fear of the unknown. And I think governance change especially brings its own trepidation because it just feels so serious. It seems so permanent. And it's different than kind of introducing another tool that doesn't seem to have as much of a consequence or involve a potential regulatory agency. And I think think about groups that are involved in that area, or you're going to have to partner with. You've got legal, compliance, risk groups. These are all really serious folks for the most part. So, just at a high level, I think that's kind of where it starts. It's kind of that unknown. And then as you kind of dig a little bit deeper, of course, there's other reasons for blockers. But just that's my sense, that it's just that kind of general fear at the top.
And Rob, what's your take on this? And is it any different in the governance arena than in sort of broader technology adoption?
No, I mean, I think Raphael hit kind of one of the key points, right? It's, do we really understand? And I'd probably amplify that with trust, right? Like we hear the stories, we hear the vision, everybody's seen the Emerald City, but we don't know that we can get there, right? There's Poppy Field or whatever. So I think that's an aspect for information governance, and it's in all of these things are the same, whether it's IG or something else. I think the other two things why we see resistance, and this is more active. I think what Raphael was talking about was kind of that passive. I'm afraid, so I'm going to freeze and do nothing. But I think people could also, if we've addressed the understanding and the trust issues, then we can move on to having a conflict. They may believe that this is the wrong way to go. They may believe that this isn't the right path, the right direction. You're like, oh no, there's regulation. I'm like, yeah, but there's lots of ways to solve regulation. And so when we talk about it, certainly we deal with the understanding and trust, and then we'll move into having a conversation about perspective and values. We find that conflict of any kind, including resistance, is about either a difference in perspective. I see it differently than you do, or it's a difference in values. I value one thing and you value something else. And so I think that resistance gets a bad rap. Everybody's, resistance, all these people, they're resistors. I don't necessarily think about it that way. I think about it as an opportunity to learn from them. Where are their fears? What are they scared by? What don't they understand? What don't they trust? How do they view the world? And what's important to them? But yeah, again, it's all the same stuff, right? No matter what you're doing, it's the same stuff.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with Thornton May recently about some of these issues, and he raised something that really rings. He was talking about the need for skeptics, but also that what you want to avoid, in his terms, were the naysayers. So in other words, skepticism is good and kind of forces an oxymoron to really harness their arguments, focus their arguments, improve their offering, think about the change elements. But then there's also people in the organization that are just going to say, no. And for people that are trying to make change, knowing which are which becomes a real challenge in trying to, drive change within the organization.
I'd offer one other person, and this is the person that I find the most challenging, and that's the subversive person.
The which person?
Subversive. So, right? They say they're supporting you, right? Like in the meeting, they're nodding their head. Yeah, you're good. Yay. And then after the meeting, there's the next meeting where they talk to all their friends, like, this is never going to work. And we can't do that. And we've tried this before. Those people, those are the ones I worry about.
Yeah, we've tried it before, people.
Yeah.
And it actually it's an argument why people maybe should change jobs periodically, because when you become one of those people, and I've been one of those people, believe me, in some of my jobs, when you become one of those people that all of a sudden is the like, yeah, we did that 8 years ago and that didn't work, and
Right.
Then it's time to maybe think about something else.
Yeah.
So when people are trying to introduce innovative technology, what's the biggest mistake they make? Rob, why don't you go first? Then we'll go Raphael this time.
I think so. So people underestimate people, right? Like we have these beautiful project plans. Oh, we're going to roll out this new AI and ML and blah, 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 which it's going to be magical, right? And we think about all the kind of technical project management, task, milestone, the stuff. And we forget to do the proper nurturing of people who are going to be involved in executing this process. And so we do all this really hard work, we build great technology, and then it falls apart because the people don't want to do it. The people don't want to go make these changes. And so from my point of view, we've not trained anybody on how to do good change management, how to do good people change management. Let me give you an example. So I could say to somebody, go build a communication plan, right? And we've all probably had to have a communication plan. But have any of us felt like we've actually done it well, like we've been taught how to do it well, like we know what the factors are, how frequently we need to communicate, and to which audiences? When I ask that question to folks, most of the time I get a no. And so for me, I think, though we say that it's people, process, and technology, the people part just keeps getting overlooked. Raphael, what do you think?
That's my answer, pretty closely to yours. I think one of the biggest failures in some of these larger initiatives is not laying the kind of the groundwork for the new tools. So we see these incredible technologies, and they're getting more intelligent by the day, but almost in every case, we skip over building the executive support that comes with it. We assume it's kind of going to be welcome just because, it just makes sense. Of course, we're going to do this. But we also don't consider the culture around us and the maturity level of where the organization is. I do see a lot of rushing towards the solution before we've really socialized conceptually what we're trying to do here. And is just to John's point about like the churn with, employees, I do think that you kind of are up against that legacy employee that's sitting there and holding you back. But, at the same time, that person also adds a lot of wisdom to the solution, whereas kind of, the younger person is kind of rushing towards it without in the back of their mind some of the experience that they're going to bring. So I think having those early conversations and doing it methodically is pretty critical. And I think that's even outside of kind of these agile methodologies that claim to kind of address all of these gaps and solve all these things. So I think it's important to take a lot of time to discuss what the problem is and really make sure everybody's on the same page.
And I think that's a really interesting point, Raphael, because I think one of the things that I've noticed is that when organizations get captivated with the technology and sort of lead with the technology, as opposed to leading with the business problem or the business process or the culture or, all those sort of other, more qualitative kinds of issues in an organization, they tend to get too fascinated with the latest bright, shiny object. And they kind of miss the point. It doesn't mean I'm not trying to discount the technology, but it's like, one of the things we always say in this space is that change is 80% people and 15% process and 5% technology. And yet we act exactly the opposite. We spend all the time on the technology side and not on those people and cultural and process issues that are, so critical kind of moving forward.
John, I'm sorry if I may too, in doing this at a couple large companies and working with these change management groups, it is tough too when you're talking about what technology brings in terms of automation. I mean, in the back of everybody's head is what does this mean for my job and my prospects? I mean, you can't ignore that. You can't just put that aside and not consider that. But going back to the other point, Bot is just helping them understand what value they're going to add to this, and probably staying away from those types of conversations, at least at the onset when you're introducing this technology.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking in the pregame again. We were talking about my friend Mark Patrick, and one of the points that Mark Patrick makes is the need to essentially understand other dialects within your organization. And so, Rob, you were talking about this a few minutes ago. Is that you've got all these characters in an organization, and if you're trying to drive a project, the legal folks have a different dialect than the IT folks, than the C-suite, than the line of business owner. You kind of go down the line. And particularly if you're a governance person trying to make your case, you've got to be flexible in those dialects and understand those perspectives and points of view along the way.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we pretend like business is business, right? And that nobody brings emotions into it. Right. And I think we forget that we all bring our own emotions into it. Raphael, you were talking about people understanding, and we don't think about the fact that people really have to understand what it means to them. Right. It's not the organization's going to grow and be, 15% growth or whatever, or save $20 billion or whatever it is. Like, they don't care. And I don't mean that. I don't mean that from a negative point of view. I don't mean to say, oh, they're really bad people. What I mean is they care first about, does this mean I'm going to have more work? Does it mean I'm going to have my job? Is the company going to be more stable? Like, they're people. And to pretend like there aren't emotions behind it, that's not really the right approach.
Yeah, so that's a good jumping off point to the unique role that OxyMorons play in this process. So talk a little bit, if an oxymoron is a person that can see both forest and trees, it's a person that can see vision and tactics. How does that person play in this kind of environment and help overcome some of the change management issues that mess people up?
Well, may I start?
Yeah, go for it.
So I was reviewing, as part of my book, I was reviewing some of the World Economic Forum's research around skills that'll be necessary in the coming years. One of them is this cognitive flexibility. It just made the list. And in other words, and the way they're explaining it is being able to kind of keep two ideas in your head at the same time.
Man, yeah.
I joke with my wife. I said the artist formerly known as multitasking. But at the same time, yeah, it's kind of being able to pivot when necessary. And I think, in our research and working with Mark and with a lot of other folks on this book, we found three things. We found first, it kind of to Rob's point too, is finding the silver lining in that work. There's a lot of opportunity there right now to kind of turn the whole ship around in terms of how you think. I think what you bring is going to mean all the difference. And if you're seen as a naysayer, you're not going to last too long, unless, of course, you're maybe grandfathered in there and you can't be moved. You're like you're like the Rock of Gibraltar. But generally, that's not going to be well received. The second thing that we learned also is that with these kind of complicated frameworks, less is more in terms of how much time you ask of your business partners and what you ask of them, and recognizing that time is scarce, both yours and theirs. So as you deliver your presentations and you outline your scope of work, you want to kind of really trim that down to a point that you're getting straight to the point, especially nowadays in the 144 character world that we live in. And then finally, getting back to kind of what Rob was talking about, the glue that is going to cement that I think is going to make those oxymorons the most successful is the relationships they built.
Yeah.
And now it's going to be more difficult than ever because we're kind of like half cyborg, half real people. And we're going to learn and we're going to adapt because that's what we do as human beings. But I think those three key elements is what we found across the spectrum in our research.
Yeah, and that's it. Some of the things that you talk about in Tomorrow's Jobs Today. I was thinking about this in the context of having watched my granddaughter, who's in second grade, and watched her interact with the technology and watch her interact with her classroom environment. And now watch her, she's back. They have a hybrid environment now. Lord knows how teachers figure out how the heck to do this, where they are, being forced into learning an awful lot of lessons that I think are going to be very interesting, 10 years from now, as you sort of like follow these people through. That's a very different skill set than, frankly, the one I grew up in. And it's going to be very interesting to watch that. Rob, give me your take on that question of oxymorons and the assist that they give to organizations in overcoming change.
I think the best thing, so I think that one of the unique characteristics, one of the unique capabilities of an oxymoron is the ability to see the things that we believe to be real but aren't real, right? And I've talked about a couple of those. But I think this idea that we have to do things because we have to do them, the belief, so I'll give you another one, right? So how many times have you guys heard, well, I sent an email and they just didn't read it? Well, of course they didn't read it. Like, I don't know how many you guys get, but I get a lot of emails every day. Of course they didn't read the one email you sent. And the idea that you're going to communicate a message, Raphael, you're talking about simplifying. And part of the reason for that is because you got to get to a core message and you got to be able to repeat that, because we don't process everything that's coming at us. And so I think one of the key things that oxymorons can do is, I think they have the capacity to see that the emperor has no clothes. And when you can do that, you can save yourself a whole bunch of time, a whole bunch of confusion, a whole bunch of everything, just to really communicate with folks. Okay, so this is real. This is not real. And we're not going to focus on the not real stuff because that doesn't add value.
Cool. Interesting. So I'm talking with two really awesome speakers from the MER Conference, running the little URL down on the bottom of the screen for folks that haven't registered yet. It's May 24 through 27. Would urge you to take a look and think about the conference. It's really the place where information governance, e-discovery, change agents, those kinds of folks hang out. And it's a really terrific and interesting community when it comes to thinking about innovation in the governance sphere. So with that, and also I think for the people that are on LinkedIn, this is being live streamed to LinkedIn, to YouTube, and to Facebook. I think there are the ability to put those where you click on those little hearts and those little, all those cool little things. So if anybody wants to fiddle around with that, that would be fun. It's always nice to see that and play with that. So you can just click on those, clap hands, and all that kind of good stuff. But anyway, let's talk about what you're going to talk about. Rob, you mentioned it earlier in terms of health records and COVID-19, and just to expand a tiny bit on what you're going to talk about. And then Raphael, I'd like to hear what you and Abby are up to at the conference.
Yeah, I mean, so last year, there was this thing called COVID, and it came out, and then we all went home, and then we had to figure out, how do we be productive? How do we still have a business if we, move atoms around? If we do things that are physically you have to be at this place for, and so we came up with this idea of doing these health screenings. What we didn't know at the time was how OSHA might interpret them. And there's a lot of really interesting conflicting answers about whether they're subject to 1910-1020, which is health and exposure records. So I'm going to talk through that process, to talk about the confusion, to talk about what do you do in the midst of the confusion. And then going forward, how do you use that as a story that you can talk to your executive leadership about, so that you can get more interest and engagement and funding for your information governance project. The beautiful part about it is everybody's heard about it. Everybody knows about it. It doesn't just apply to some people. It's global. It's a pandemic. Everybody. And it gives you the opportunity to expose where there's confusion and how do you find ways to move forward in that confusion. So it's obviously a brand new talk, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to share with folks. My goal is I share it with them, and they take some form of that to their executive leadership to talk about the importance of information governance and what the potential the consequences could be.
Raphael, what are you and Abby going to be talking about?
Well, if I could, with Rob, I interviewed somebody in the informatics field. She's actually a medical doctor and a data scientist. And it kind of leads into what we're going to be discussing, which is we're going to spend a little bit of time with the latest jobs report from the World Economic Forum, talking about some of those soft skills that are coming into the workplace. We're thinking the same way as Rob, that this COVID was really a catalyst for change. And we know now, John, as you know, that you don't stay in one role for the most part, the rest of your career. And I think that creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. And so how do you deal with that, especially just kind of constantly having to upskill with your whole, with your career? We think it's hard. And then, you're facing all kinds of outside pressures regarding that. What we want to do with Tomorrow's Jobs today was really present kind of a cornucopia of incredible voices and achievers in the information governance space. Like you said, people like Mark Patrick in government, doctors working in informatics. We have a gentleman who does e-discovery at the International Criminal Court at the Hague. Another individual who does artificial intelligence for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and each one of them, kind of brings something special aside from their background to that role. And so as we look at the IG professionals that we're seeing at the MER conference, we want to kind of provide just a ton of examples of great avenues that they can go down as they make the next choice in their career. That's
terrific. Yeah. And it's Rob, the issue that you mentioned about health screenings is so interesting to me, because I was looking at some of that same stuff from OSHA and some of that context of, like, what does it mean to have to keep those classify those as health records, keep those for 30 years, beyond the departure date, right. Which, leads you right into the nightmare that every records manager has, which is event-based disposition and retention, and, on and on and on. And it's just, it's just such a rich area, I think, to explore opportunities. And then the other one, Raphael, when you were talking about sort of changing roles, and, I think one of the challenges right now in the governance and records arena is, again, going to back to that idea about dialects. This is a much different job than it was 10 years ago. And it's a different job now than it'll be 10 years from now. And so how do those people navigate that, that volatility. I mean, it's rewarding in many ways, but it's also a pretty challenging deal too, when you start getting into it. So again, MER Conference.com, and you can get some information on that. And so let me just ask each of you guys to wrap up and think about, maybe one specific piece of change management advice that you'd have for organizations that are contemplating a significant governance initiative. And Raphael, why don't you go first?
Well, I would say because of the nature of, some of the change with the regulations, don't overestimate your audience. Don't talk down to them, but don't assume that they are familiar with even something as big as privacy. But you can also help them connect with their own kind of personal feelings about those topics as well. So make sure you make them feel like they're part of the solution is what I would. That's my big piece of advice.
Rob, how about you?
Yeah, I think, John, you said it earlier, right? Like people are 85%. And I think as organizations are evaluating where they're at and where they're going and these initiatives, I would ask them, are you spending 85% of your time thinking about how you're going to motivate people, how you're going to get people engaged, how you're going to get them to do the behaviors that you really want? But look, we forget organizational change is really, truly all about personal change. At the end of the day, some person has to do something different or the organization doesn't change, whether it's pay better attention to privacy or it's manage records better or it's whatever it is. We're asking for humans to take behaviors. And if you don't know how to motivate somebody to take a behavior, how are you going to move your project forward? And if you think you know how to motivate people, then you've never had teenagers.
Well, on that note, thank you guys for joining me today. Thanks for your perspectives on change management in the governance arena. And I'm glad to classify you guys as true oxymorons, and I can add you to my list. So thanks so much. And make sure you buy both of their books because they're both terrific books. And when I post the summary of this, I'll put links to all those books so you can make sure that you get them. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate the time today.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.